Right, welcome to this explainer. If you're currently camped out in the library during reading week, totally buried under a massive module reading list, trying to figure out how to structure a bulletproof academic argument, you're absolutely going to love this one. Okay, let's dive into this. Today, we're looking at something that feels incredibly modern, even though it's, well, over 2 millennia old. We're unpacking Chapter 7 of the Kathavatthu. Now, don't just think of this as some dusty religious manuscript. It's actually the ancient world's ultimate fact-checking manual. Literally a masterclass in how to handle a massive, escalating institutional feud. Honestly, the kind of drama that makes today's online arguments look like child's play. We're talking infiltration, huge philosophical beefs, and a full-on royal intervention.
So, what exactly happens when a single unified philosophy fractures into 18 warring schools? It's a massive webhook, right? Just imagine a single student society or a unified political movement that suddenly splinters into nearly 24 different factions, and every single one is claiming to be the true representative of the original idea. How on earth do you resolve that? How do you actually figure out who's telling the truth? Because this wasn't just some minor disagreement. This was a massive, escalating institutional crisis that threatened the very core of early Buddhism. The whole system was cracking, and someone had to step in to set a gold standard of truth.
Which brings us to Section 1, the Great Buddhist Schism, basically the crack in the system.
Before we trace how this timeline actually unfolds, it's worth noting that this text presents an amazing academic cold case. Historically, tradition claimed that the Buddha himself preached the Kathavatthu, but modern writers, critical thinkers trained to scrutinize their sources, they seriously doubted this origin story. Why? Because the text specifically deals with controversies that literally didn't even exist until centuries after the Buddha passed away. It's an incredible historical mystery, a text claiming ancient authority while actively dealing with highly evolved, later-era institutional drama. So to understand the crisis, let's look at how things splintered. Right after the passing of the Buddha, things were unified. The original teachings were rehearsed and codified by 500 senior monks, the Theras, forming what we know as the Theravada school. But fast forward exactly 100 years. A group called the Vajjaputtika monks start demanding laxer rules. It started as a fairly simple administrative dispute over 10 specific practices. Basically, they just wanted relaxed regulations. But when the establishment said no, they completely broke away and formed the Mahasanghika sect. And this initial crack over rules, it rapidly escalated into full-blown doctrinal disputes. By the time we hit the 200-year mark after the Buddha's passing, that single unified school had exploded into 18 different schools. And here's the real kicker. 17 of those were deemed entirely unorthodox by the original Theravadins. Just absolute, exponential fragmentation.
Let's move on to see how this builds in Section 2, Fake Monks and Royal Perks. This is the absolute peak of the chaos.
So following the notoriously bloody Kalinga War, King Ashoka had a profound change of heart, met a young monk named Nigrada, and became a fiercely dedicated Buddhist. Suddenly, the state was throwing immense royal support, massive funding, and huge prestige behind Buddhism. But as you can probably guess, whenever a massive institution suddenly gets royal backing and unlimited resources, it attracts clout chasers. And this brilliantly illustrates the divide. On one hand, you had pious bhikkhus, genuine, dedicated followers just trying to perform their required community rituals, like the Upasattha. But to do these rituals, the rules require a completely common understanding and shared purity among the monks. On the other hand, opposite them, you had the pseudo-Buddhists. Because of King Ashoka's immense patronage, adherents of completely different faiths essentially just threw on the robes and jumped on the bandwagon purely for personal gain. We're talking free meals, royal perks, the whole shebang. The genuine monks literally couldn't function or perform their basic institutional duties because their ranks were absolutely flooded with infiltrators who didn't even believe in the doctrine. It was pure gridlock.
Which leads us straight to Section 3. Enter the Kathavatthu, the royal intervention.
To settle this gridlock, King Ashoka realized his funding had accidentally created a massive crisis. The institutions were totally paralyzed, so he convened a huge state-sponsored council at a place called Pataliputta. The main goal? To firmly fix the correct word of the Buddha and officially excommunicate the non-Theravada schismatists. But obviously, a disciplinary hearing needs a lead investigator, an author for the findings. Enter Moggalliputta Tisithera. He headed up the scrutiny committee. And what makes him so fascinating from an academic perspective is that the Kathavatthu is literally the only book in the Theravada Abhidhamma canon that has a traditionally acknowledged separate author. The tradition kind of squares this circle by claiming the Buddha himself actually predicted, centuries earlier, that Moggalliputta Tisithera would be born, would purge these specific wrong views, and would compile the approved and rejected versions into this exact text.
So, just how much ideological mess did Moggalliputta Tisithera actually have to clean up?
216. That is the sheer, staggering scale of the philosophical beefs settled by this ancient text. 216 distinct, specific controversies and variant viewpoints that had completely infected the institution were systematically dragged out into the light, ruthlessly scrutinized, and definitively addressed.
But of course, you can't just have a massive list of 216 arguments floating around randomly. That's just noise. So they meticulously organized this incredible fact-checking endeavor into 23 massive chapters. 23 chapters of dense, structured back-and-forth dialogue entirely designed to root out the truth.
Now for Section 4, the Ancient Debate Playbook, setting the gold standard. They didn't just shout down their opponents, right? They set up a framework that perfectly mirrors the rigorous critical analysis expected in your university seminars today. They used two distinct methods to repudiate these heretical views systematically. First up, the logical method. This wasn't about feelings or vibes. It was about analyzing concepts down to their absolute bare bones, strictly determining their logical limits and drawing hard, undeniable conclusions. Basically, if an opponent's view resulted in a logical paradox, it was thrown straight out. Second, they used the authority method. This involved directly appealing to the recognized statements of the Buddha to see if the opponent's view actually conformed to the established canonical word. And what's really interesting is that both sides actually tried to quote the Buddha to support their views, but the Kathavatthu's methodology demanded that the quotes be logically consistent with the whole teachings. It is incredibly rigorous stuff.
To actually record these debates, they wrote them as transcripts of dialogues between two parties. First, you have the Sakavati. This translates roughly to one's own view. So the crucial point is, whenever you see this term in the text, it represents the home team. It's the accepted orthodox Theravada position that the compilers were fiercely defending.
And opposite them in the dialogue is the Paravati. This translates to other's view, representing the opponent's sectarian perspective in the debate. What is genuinely remarkable here is the absolute commitment to transparency. They didn't just erase their enemies from the history books, they actively recorded the heretical views right alongside the accepted ones. By presenting the Sakavati and the Paravati fairly in a continuous back-and-forth dialogue, they created a complete, totally transparent document of fact-checking. You could see exactly why the opponent was wrong, step by step.
Finally, let's look at Section 5, an enduring philosophical legacy, looking way beyond the drama.
This goes way beyond the immediate crisis of King Ashoka's era. While it absolutely started as a way to kick out fake monks and settle arguments over rules, the Kathavatthu evolved into a document with massive historical and philosophical gravity. Now, what's really interesting about this is its dual value. Historically, it's an absolute goldmine. Because it fairly recorded the Paravati, it survives today as a primary report on the viewpoints of all those lost Buddhist traditions, contributing massively to our understanding of wider Indian religions in general. But philosophically, it's a total milestone. You can literally read this text and watch universally accepted basic canons of logic emerging on the page in real time. And they tackled the heaviest subjects imaginable. For instance, the reality of the person or the Pudgala. The Kathavatthu doesn't just casually dismiss the idea of an enduring soul, it subjects the concept of the person to a blistering 18-point logical analysis to prove that existence comprises only a mass of shifting elements, not an enduring self.
The source material summarizes the impact perfectly, stating, philosophically it represents a highly developed philosophical dialogue far ahead of the times. This isn't just a historical curiosity. It is a manual of logic and debate that easily rivals the rigor of any modern academic discourse you'll encounter today. It proves that the desire to logically define reality and to ruthlessly fact-check those who distort it is a really ancient and highly refined human pursuit.
Which leaves us with a final, slightly mind-bending thought to take away from this explainer. The Kathavatthu uses devastating logic to dismantle the very concept of an enduring person, proving we are just a mass of shifting elements. But if that's true, if the enduring self is just an illusion completely dismantled by ancient logic, then when we argue online today, when we fiercely defend our own viewpoints, who is really winning the debate? Think about that for a second. Thank you so much for joining me as we explored this incredible ancient text. I hope it gives you a fresh perspective the next time you have to critically analyze a difficult subject for your modules. Keep questioning and keep learning.